Good morning and welcome to the 10th Annual Sacred Trust Talks and Book Signing event, hosted by Gettysburg National Military Park and the Gettysburg Foundation. The Gettysburg Foundation is the nonprofit partner of the National Park Service at Gettysburg. I'm Cindy Small, Director of Marketing for the Gettysburg Foundation, and I'm pleased to tell you that over the years, as we have presented the Sacred Trust Talks, we have had the pleasure of hosting renowned authors and historians, National Park Service rangers, licensed battlefield guides, and others as they share their unique views and perspectives on history, on the Battle of Gettysburg, this year on 1864, so many different perspectives with you, our guests. Coming up next is Wayne Motts. Wayne will present the Fighting the Civil War, Treasures from the National Civil War Museum from 1864. He will present a unique program showcasing rare and, in many cases, one-of-a-kind items related to the pivotal year 1864 in the collection of the National Civil War Museum. Wayne will discuss this important year in the Civil War using actual artifacts and items, connecting them to the story of the fighting. To tell you a little bit about Wayne Motts is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Civil War Museum located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He has been a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg National Military Park for over a quarter century. And he is the narrator of the popular Gettysburg Field Guide driving tour of the battlefield produced by Travel Brains Corporation. Please join me in welcoming Wayne Motts.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if this is on because they gave me a mic that's here. Everybody knows my voice is loud. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank Cindy Small, all the folks from the Gettysburg Foundation for their invitation to come speak to you this morning. I walked up this morning to the battlefield guide room. There was a little sign on the ground on the lawn that said, "It's like the World Cup." I like to think I'm pretty good, but I don't think I'm that good. Everybody. So no pressure to make sure all of this is done correctly. For those of you that were here last year and you heard my talk related to treasures in the Battle of Gettysburg, I'm going to do something similar to that this year, but all of these items that I'm going to show you relate to 1864, and some of them have Gettysburg connections as well. And for those of you that were here last year, you probably heard me talk about one of the reasons why I'm so geeked, if that's a good word to use, about artifacts, items, and historical materials. So if you were here last year, I hope you'll pardon me while I give everyone else who wasn't here this little explanation as to why I like this talk and why I put it together. If you go in the museum, the Foundation has done a wonderful job doing the treasures of the Civil War. There is an exhibit in there that shows some of the rarest items that belong to many famous folks related to the American Civil War. I got interested in the Civil War because my father had a set of diaries, 2 diaries that belonged to a Union soldier killed at Morris Island, South Carolina, assaulting Fort Wagner. And this soldier was in a Union regiment in the brigade right behind the 54th Massachusetts of the movie Glory fame. And so as special treat, my dad would pull these things out and he would read to me entries of the diaries. So that's how I got interested, because I had a personal connection with a particular artifact related to the Civil War. People learn in many different ways. Preservation of the American Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, happens in many different ways. I think most of you in this crowd would think of Civil War preservation as preserving land. Land is a key piece of understanding our American Civil War history by preserving it. There is no question that is important. Going out, standing out on the battlefields, looking over them, reading the accounts of the soldiers, and understanding it. I would also say that preserving buildings and structures is pretty important. Now, we just had an announcement here just recently from the Civil War Trust a few days ago. They're going to preserve Lee's headquarters, going to take it back, make it look like it did at the time of the battle, and preserve the land around it. What if, ladies and gentlemen, you could not go to Arlington House and stand where Robert E. Lee stood when he made that fateful decision to stay with Virginia, to go with the Confederacy during the Civil War? What if Ford's Theater was a Target store? Let's talk about it. Our understanding of the war would be greatly diminished. our empathy for it, our connection to it, would be reduced if we did not have those things. And when I think about the Civil War, is I think of it like a three-legged stool. So you've got land you're preserving, you got buildings and structures you're preserving, and then for me, I'm a museum person. So I believe in preserving items, the last tangible vestiges of the American Civil War, paper goods, photographs, and objects. At the National Civil War Museum, 39 miles north of where you're at right now, we have one of the finest collections of three-dimensional objects, of photographs, and of paper related to the Civil War. How do we know what to preserve? Because we have accounts telling us about it. So preservation comes in many forms, and I hope all of you will think in a different way when you leave here today, and think about all three of these things. So what Wayne Motts is really telling you to do is to write many checks to the preservation group of your choice. And as a chief executive officer of a nonprofit, that's what we do. So find out what you want to preserve and support it, but I'm going to bet that it's going to be more than one thing, okay? Now, what I put together here is the war in very broad strokes for 1864, okay? So we're going to fight the war. We've got about 20 objects, but before we do that, quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about Union strategy. We all know what Union strategy was or is for 1861. It's really not unified, it's not cooperative, it's not total until we get to 1864. But blockade of the southern coast, control the inland waterways. If you're in the north, this is your main grand strategy. If you're in the south and you're Jefferson Davis, which is not very good for you, you've got to try to defend territory wherever you may be, which is sort of an offensive and defensive strategy. Defend what you can, attack and make threats where you're able to do that. This is sort of grand strategy for both the Union and the Confederacy. And to see this in a graphic, everyone has probably seen this graphic. This was a newspaper graphic of the Union strategy, which was named for Winfield Scott's plan called the Anaconda Plan, the slow suffocation of the South. There's a couple problems with this. Nobody in the North has patience, right? They want this all over as quickly as we can get it done. And number two, the man who proposed this is a Virginian, Winfield Scott, not a real plus in his favor. This really is the strategy by the end of the American Civil War that defeats the Confederacy. But no one wants to admit to it in 1861. So by 1864, you can take a look at some of these areas that are controlled here. Everything in blue is going to be Union control. Everything, of course, in the pink or reddish color is going to be under Confederate control, and you will notice the Mississippi River under Union control after Vicksburg and Port Hudson surrender in July of 1863, right after the Battle of Gettysburg, places the western half of the Confederacy completely isolated. So if you're in Louisiana, you're in Arkansas, you're in Texas, you have some problems there. And now, what is going to be the Union strategy for 1864? How are we going to go on with what we've been able to build on and defeat the folks there? So this is like 101 grand strategy for 1864. This is what it looks like, everybody. And these are huge generalizations. We are oversimplifying everything we're talking about here. But for the sake of all of us here, let's get a framework of what we're going to see when it comes to the objects related to this year, okay? So Grant sits down with Lincoln and they have a discussion about what this strategy needs to look like, because Grant is promoted to be Commander-in-Chief of all U.S. armies in March of 1864, right at the beginning of the spring campaign season for the fourth season of the war. This is what Grant sort of envisions. Major General Nathaniel Banks will take Mobile, Alabama, a port in the Gulf, the only port east of the Mississippi River in the Gulf really open for Confederate traffic, and Grant wants that sealed off. He wants Benjamin Butler to threaten Richmond in the Petersburg supply route by moving up the James River. He wants Meade and the Army of Potomac to fight Lee. Second half, he wants William Tecumseh Sherman to move from Chattanooga, Tennessee into the heart of Georgia, heading for Atlanta. Atlanta is a key city. It has many railroads that come in and out of it. It also produces cannon and other ordnance for the Confederacy. Two of their ordnance-producing capability places are in Georgia, and Grant wants these cut off. He wants Major General Franz Sigel with his Union forces to advance up the Shenandoah Valley. I think you all know when you go up the Shenandoah Valley, you go south. When you go down the Shenandoah Valley, you go north. So Winchester is at what we would call the lower end of the valley, okay, and vice versa. And then as a side, I want to call it a sideshow. Certainly George Crook and William Averill would never consider it a sideshow. But Grant also wants to operate in Western Virginia and West Virginia against railroad targets, specifically the Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, which supplies eastern Tennessee. Now, how did President Lincoln describe all these things? You know what he said? He said, those not skinning can hold the leg. Those not skinning can hold the leg. So the main effort here is going to be William Tecumseh Sherman and going to be Grant and Meade against Lee. Okay, William Tecumseh Sherman, Atlanta, Grant and Meade against Robert E. Lee. Those would be considered the main operations we're talking about here. Now, this is what Grant envisions. Folks, some of this doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen quite the way that General Grant envisions it. First of all, President Lincoln does not want Nathaniel Banks to go against Mobile. He wants him to go in the Trans-Mississippi Theater in Louisiana and Texas. So Banks is not ordered to attack Mobile, although we'll just see in a little bit here that a naval force will cut it off in August of 1864. Butler moves up, but then is bottled up at a place called Bermuda Hundred, pretty much ineffective. Meade begins the Overland Campaign on May 4th, and of course they fight a series of battles which eventually backs up Robert E. Lee into the defenses of Petersburg in June of 1864, which will, of course, then commit to a siege that will go for about 9 months. While Grant moves against Lee, Sherman on the same day, May 4th, will take about 100,000 men, move against Joe Johnson, and will go move against Atlanta, basically outflanking Johnson wherever he is. And at one case, Sherman decides to attack Confederate forces, and that is going to cost him over 3,000 casualties, a place called Kennesaw Mountain. By later in July and August, you've got, at that time then, John Bell Hood, because Hood's been placed in command over Johnson. You have Confederate troops in the outskirts now of Atlanta. Hood tries to attack, but is unsuccessful, and Sherman sets out to cut off the city. This is the whole Civil War for 1864, just about in 5 slides here. And Hood evacuates Atlanta, and then you all know that Sherman decides to come up with this plan to march to the sea while he does that. Meanwhile, George Crook sets up against the railroads, and David Hunter operates in the Shenandoah Valley. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these. Let me get this. Whoops. November 8th, the president's reelected. Sherman will move from Atlanta to go to march to the sea, and of course Hood is defeated at Nashville. This is the whole war, basically, for the campaign season from start to finish. So what Grant envisioned is not precisely what happened. But by the end of that year, by New Year's Day, 1865, by New Year's Day, 1865, the American Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be over in about 100 days after this campaign is done. Think about what it achieves. And most people don't think about that when it comes to that grand strategy of how it's approached. Most of this, of the objects I'm going to show you, have to do with the grand strategy. But I'm going to show you a couple unusual ones that the National Civil War Museum has, a couple unusual items which don't have to do with the overall grand strategy, but are pretty interesting items for 1864. And we're going to start these off by year. So I think some of you in this room know who this person is. I know my colleague Jim Hessler, who's in this room, very much knows who this is because he loves the cavalry. This is Judson Kilpatrick, ladies and gentlemen, a New Jersey general who led a division of cavalry here at Gettysburg. He will actually come up with a plan to raid Richmond and free Union prisoners and destroy logistics related to the Confederate war effort outside Richmond before the spring campaign season in February and March of 1864. He goes to President Lincoln, he goes to Secretary of War Stanton, and he says, I want to go up against the Confederates I want to liberate prisoners at Belle Island, which is in Richmond, and at Libby Prison, and destroy railroad capabilities. And I want to do that with your permission to go ahead and do that. He secures permission to go ahead and do that. This raid begins with Kilpatrick having about 3,500 cavalrymen. He will hit Richmond from the north. This is how he envisions it. And he will invite to come along with him, about a week before the raid, a young promising officer by the name of Ulrich Dahlgren. Dahlgren was an aide-de-camp to George Gordon Meade here in the Battle of Gettysburg. During a retreat from Gettysburg, fighting Confederate forces at Hagerstown, Maryland, he is shot in the leg. His leg is amputated. He is back in command, commanding cavalry in 1864. He is the son of Rear Admiral John Dahlgren from Philadelphia. So Kilpatrick plans about 3,500 of his men, about 450 men, just slightly under 4,000 troops, with Dahlgren's men coming in from the south, while Kilpatrick's men come in from the north. And the key to this, ladies and gentlemen, is surprise. On the 28th of February, in the evening, about 6 o'clock, the forces will start out for Richmond. About 7 hours later, at 1 a.m. on February 29th, 1864. And we have a February 29th. Why? Because 1864 is what? It's a leap year. That's exactly right. There'll be a quiz afterwards. We're going to quiz you all on this. This is a handwritten note by Kilpatrick in the collection of the National Civil War Museum, which I think is pretty phenomenal. I don't know if it's ever been in print or not. This note was written at 1 a.m. on February 29th, immediately when Kilpatrick's forces arrive at Ely's Ford. And here's what it says, and he's writing this to his chief of staff. My advance captured the picket and reserves of the enemy at Ely's Ford, comprising of a captain, a lieutenant, and 15 men. It was a complete surprise. No alarm has been given. The enemy does not anticipate our movement. My command is crossing in good order. Colonel Dahlgren, the advance has reached Chancellorsville. So this is a little handwritten note right at the onset of this raid that Kilpatrick is sending to his chief of staff, informing him that they have gained surprise. Now that surprise is not going to last very long, because on this day, the 29th of February, at Beaver Dam Station, an alarm is raised by the Confederates when Kilpatrick gets there, and they dispatch General Wade Hampton, a very famous South Carolina general, to come in and try to take care of Kilpatrick and his men. Meanwhile, Dahlgren's men have gone to try to cross the James River, but it is swollen, and he is unable to get at Richmond the way that is anticipated. This is a very controversial raid, because on March 2nd, 1864, Dahlgren is killed in a skirmish with Confederate units by the 9th Virginia Cavalry, and papers are found on his body that basically say that there will be, the city of Richmond will be destroyed, and that Jefferson Davis will be killed along with his cabinet. These were published, all of these papers were published in the Richmond newspaper. Well, in the collections of the National Civil War Museum, not only do we have this telegram, which is at the beginning of the campaign, but we also have a handwritten address read by Colonel Dahlgren, or spoken to Colonel Dahlgren, what he is putting out to his men. And it is right here. There was an autograph dealer named Charles Hamilton who examined this document in 1994. This man died in 1996. He is the man in New York City as a manuscript authority, handwriting expert, that proved the Hitler diaries fake. If you remember, about 30 years ago, some diaries were found. They were said to belong to Adolf Hitler. He later went on to prove that these diaries were fake. This document, according to him, as a handwriting expert in 1994, a study that he did of this, and this is only the first page of the document, this is all in Ulrich Dahlgren's own hand, all of it here. And the papers that were found on his body that were published in the Richmond paper are part of the transcript, which you see right here. Dahlgren wrote out special instructions to his men, and he also wrote out, where it says at the top, that's what it says, officers and men, you've been selected from the brigades and regiments as picked command to attempt a desperate undertaking, an undertaking which, if successful, will write your names in the hearts of your countrymen. Now he goes on in another page of this document, which is not shown here because I'm not showing you all the pages of it. He goes on to say, quote, "The men must keep together and well in hand, and once in the city it must be destroyed and Jeff Davis and cabinet killed," end quote. Now when these were found on Captain or Colonel at that time Dahlgrens' body, they were taken into Richmond, his corpse was taken into Richmond, and they were published in the Richmond Examiner. Graphic copies of these were sent from George Meade to Robert E. Lee, and basically Union High Command disavowed all of this, saying that there was no order from the Secretary of War, no order from the President of the United States, no order from Kilpatrick, nobody, that Jefferson Davis and his cabinet would be killed and the city would be destroyed. The Richmond paper, of course, furious over this, and actually wrote this: "The following papers and memorandum were found on Dahlgren's person and contain the indisputable evidence of the diabolical designs of the enemy." So how much this contributed later on to, let's say, Booth and the assassination plot, we really don't know. This raid was unsuccessful. And by March 4th, it was over. No prisoners were freed at all. And it doesn't seem that Kilpatrick made any type of preparation what would happen if they even captured the prisoners, how to feed them, how to transport them here. But it's one of those interesting mysteries of the war. When the rebel, quote, archives, end quote, was captured, Edwin Stanton had certain papers sent to him. Among the papers were the papers found on Dahlgren's body. To this day, those papers are missing, sort of like the pages of the Booth diary. We have no idea where the originals were that were on his body. But this is an original handwritten account by Dahlgren in his own hand, talking about that. So it's pretty interesting artifact. And ladies and gentlemen, if you hold that and you don't get goosebumps, you don't have a pulse. Something wrong with you. Okay, you're not all there. And so every time you see this stuff, you can't believe what you're holding really is real. It's just real. Now, 2 months after Dahlgren's raid, one of these legs of Grant's strategy is going to be put in motion. And that will be out in western Virginia and West Virginia under the command of George Crook. Born in 1828, graduate of West Point in 1852. He will lead the Kanawha Division. That is a division that served in West Virginia and Maryland. This division was in Antietam, but it's serving in western Virginia. And on April 29th, 1864, he will have orders to leave Charleston, West Virginia, march south 140 miles to Dublin, Virginia, destroy the railroad, the Tennessee and Virginia Railroad that supplies Knoxville, Tennessee. That is what he's going to do. And he's going to give orders to General William Averill to destroy Saltville, Virginia. Saltville, Virginia was a major salt producing area for the Confederates to preserve food. If you don't have salt, how are you going to preserve meat, everybody? Not only for the army, but for the civilians. You're not going to be able to do it. And Crook's men will set out to be able to do that. Those men will travel south. They will fight a battle on May 9th, 1864 at a battle called Cloyd's Mountain. That's now in Pulaski County, Virginia, and they will be successful in tearing up the railroad, destroying it. This is what it actually looks like, and I know that slide is pretty hard to see, but that is from the OR supplement. The arrow at the top of the slide, ladies and gentlemen, is up by Charlottesville, Virginia. The circle is Lynchburg, Virginia, where the railroads come in. And what is circled down at the left of the slide, bottom left of the slide, is Saltville. And the arrow at the very bottom down there is where Knoxville is. Can you see it? You can make that out. That's the entire railroad. That railroad not only splits off and goes to Petersburg from Charlottesville, but it goes up to Alexandria, Virginia. Destroying this cuts off Confederate supply lines that are there. If you're a Union Army and you can later control it, then you can control the supply lines that flow up and down it. That's there. Crook accomplishes his task, but William Averill is not able to capture Saltville. As a matter of fact, there are 2 battles fought at Saltville, and it's not until the fall of 1864 that really that comes under Confederate control. Crook had a 40-year career in the United States Army. He ended the Army right after this. In 1864, he's promoted as Major General, And what he used while he was writing all his official correspondence is this desk in the collection of the National Civil War Museum. This is William Crook's actual field desk. It's actually inscribed to him, used in the year 1864, and pivotal when it comes to skinning of holding the leg when it comes to skinning. Remember, if those that are not skinning are holding the leg, it looks like George Crook is going to be holding the leg there. So this field desk was used by him. Later on, you may not know, or some of you may know, that he dies in 1890. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. This is the man that brought in Geronimo. George Crook is the man that used Apache scouts against Apaches. He's the man that brought in Geronimo. Geronimo later got drunk and went back out on a raid, and Nelson Miles is given final credit for bringing him in. But it was really the tactics employed and utilized by George Crook that will bring in Geronimo. And if you go to Arlington National Cemetery today, right near Robert E. Lee's house, he is buried near there, you will see a relief of the surrender of Geronimo right on the back of his tombstone. Well, in the Civil War, 11 years out of West Point, he is fighting in West Virginia using this desk. Now, at the same time that he is raiding into West Virginia, we know that Grant and Meade are stepping off on May 4th for what? The Overland Campaign. This is the campaign that is going to be with the Battle of the Wilderness, Cold Harbor, North Anna. You know all of Spotsylvania. You know all of these battles that are here. One of the Confederate generals fighting on May 8th, 1864, at the Battle of Laurel Hill, is a Confederate general that was here at the Battle of Gettysburg, and that is this man, Joseph Kershaw. This is an original image, carte de visite, of Joseph Kershaw, born in 1822, a veteran of the Mexican War, promoted to brigadier general the 13th of February, 1862, commanding a brigade and commanding a division. He is captured in action at the Battle of Sailor's Creek, April 6, 1865. At Laurel Hill, he will be in command of troops, and he will be using, ladies and gentlemen, while he's there, this sword. This is Joseph Kershaw's actual sword, and we know a lot about this sword. Right now, you cannot see it at the National Civil War Museum. You need to fly or get in your car and go to the Confederate Relic Room in Columbia, South Carolina, because it is on loan to them for their exhibit for 1864. This sword is a Craft Goldsmith and Craft sword. That is a sword maker in Columbia, South Carolina. They made the swords carried by Wade Hampton and carried by Bradley T. Johnson in the Civil War, among others. This one is an unusual one. I've seen a lot of field and staff swords. This is a model 1850 field and staff sword, but it is very unusual for two reasons. First of all, it is sharpened on both ends. Usually with these swords, you only have them sharp on one end, and the blade is straight rather than curved. If you go into the museum here and you see the samples, they've got some beautiful ones here in the museum, you can see a sample of what that looked like. When Kershaw had this sword constructed, he had it constructed straight. We do not know why. On the hilt of it, it's inscribed in oak and laurel wreaths. It says CS right across from it. And this sword is pretty interesting because we have an account from Joseph Kershaw that was published in a magazine called the North-South Trader in 1987, a handwritten manuscript from Kershaw that describes him turning this sword over at the Battle of Sailor's Creek. At Sailor's Creek, when he's captured on April 6, 1865, he is carrying this sword, probably carried this sword at Gettysburg. My guess is he got it in February of 1862 because it is inscribed General J.B. Kershaw. His promotion is in February. He carried this most certainly through Gettysburg, all the way through Laurel Hill and the campaigns in the Overland Campaign. And in 1865, when he is captured at Sailor's Creek, he gives this sword to a man named Corporal Smith Lemur, and he is in Company G of the 2nd Ohio Volunteer Cavalry Regiment. That man was an Ohio recipient of the Medal of Honor for capturing Kershaw's headquarters flag there. So he actually turned his sword over, and we have that written documentation. How it got out of Corporal Lemur's hands into the hands of the National Civil War Museum, I can't really give you the full provenance on it, but it is a description of this sword. With most of the items, we do have an accounting of where the stuff came from. So we've got what I would think is pretty good provenance on what this is. 2 days later, fighting against Kershaw's men is a Gettysburg veteran, And it's this man, James C. Rice. Many of you know this man because he's the man that takes over for Strong Vincent when Strong Vincent is mortally wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg. Rice is the colonel of the 44th New York. At the Battle of Bull Run, this man was a captain in charge of a company of the Garibaldi Guards. Now, he was born in Worthington, Massachusetts. So he was a teacher in Mississippi, but he spent a lot of his career in New York. And I think a lot of people think he's a native New Yorker, but he's not. He's actually a native of Massachusetts. He is mortally wounded May 10th, 1864, when his leg is shattered fighting at the Battle of Spotsylvania. He lives about 3 hours. When the surgeon asks him, how can we make you more comfortable? What does he tell the surgeon? He says, turn my face to the enemy. I want to see the enemy when I die. Those are things that like stories are made out of, right? You don't need to make this stuff up because it's so good. Rice expires. He is buried in New York, in Albany, New York. He is not buried in Worthington, Massachusetts. But the Worthington, Massachusetts Library has almost all of his personal belongings, including his coat, his sword, many of his items. And they put it on permanent loan to the National Civil War Museum so more people can see it. So the National Civil War Museum actually has his coat. This is his coat as a brigadier general, has his sword, his epaulets, and a number of his items. We also have his lieutenant colonel epaulets that he would have worn on the peninsula. The museum has that on loan, and we're proudly displaying that as part of our 1864 exhibit. Now, we know that fighting at Spotsylvania, ladies and gentlemen, is a bloody battle. Rice being killed there on May 10th. There is a massive attack there against Confederate forces on May 12th, 1864 at the Mule Shoe. Massive attack there. One of the most unique items in the National Civil War Museum, I've seen one or two others in my career, but not very many of them, is a diary that is associated with two men. The first of these two men is George W. Ellis. Ellis was born the 10th of December, 1821. He lived in Mississippi in a town and county south of Jackson. He enlisted early in Company D of the 12th Mississippi. This would be Cornet Posey's brigade at Gettysburg. In 1864, it was under a general by the name of Harris. He becomes ill. He is out of the service during the Gettysburg campaign, and he goes back in. He re-enlists in October of 1863. He is killed in action fighting at the Mule Shoe on May 12, 1864. His body was recovered. This is a picture of his tombstone, complete with Masonic symbol on it, and it says on the tombstone, died at the Battle of the Wilderness. That's not the Battle of the Wilderness that you and I know that was fought right before this, but he dies in the wilderness fighting at Spotsylvania in the Mule Shoe. His diary was either found on his body or picked up by a Union soldier. And that Union soldier was George W. Hacker. Hacker was a member of the 138th Pennsylvania, a unit recruited in Philadelphia. He was captured May 19th, a week after Ellis is killed. He picks up the diary. Then he himself is captured. He writes the first entry in Ellis's diary. This is a diary in the collection of the National Civil War Museum that is first written in ink by a Confederate soldier, then it is written in pencil by a Union soldier in the Civil War. It's used by men of both sides in the war. This man goes to Andersonville Prison, and he musters out of service in 1865. He survives the war, but I haven't found out yet when he dies nor where he is buried. I have many trips to the National Archives plan, ladies and gentlemen, to run down more of this research. The problem with this is you could research all day doing it, and it's what I most like to do. Every one of these objects has a story. This is a image of the diary. At the very top of it, it says George W. Ellis, Pine Bluff, Mississippi, with the county there as well. He says that he leaves for Virginia from Mississippi on August 17, 1863 to rejoin the command. I told you he re-enlisted in October. That is in ink in the upper right-hand side of this diary. Now, let's look at one of the other pages. This is a page, and I had to do contrast color, so I know that looks dark. It's extremely poor to read. But at the very top of the diary, ladies and gentlemen, is the entry for 151 years ago today. At the very top of this diary is the entry from July 5th, 1864. You know what it says? It is blank because he didn't write in it. Don't you hate that when that occurs? Unfortunately, he did not write in it. But the next entry is 151 years ago tomorrow. That is in the middle of this slide on the left-hand side. And it says rumors are circulating that they're going to take the prisoners out of Andersonville and move them to Atlanta. At the very back of the diary, in September of the year, he tells his wife the happiest day of his life is the day that he's going to get released. That's what he's writing right in the back of the diary when he's able to be with his wife again here. That's what it says. This is a diary written by a Confederate soldier, once again, picked up by a Union soldier, and written inside by a Union soldier. Now, I've only seen about 2 or 3 of those in my career. And this is a pretty interesting story. Oh, if only those pages could talk. What more could they tell us about the American Civil War there? One in ink, one in pencil. Now, we've got all these campaigns going on in May and June, right? Overland campaign. By June 15th, Lee is in the line at Petersburg, and Grant will launch attacks against the Petersburg line 15 and 18 June. At the same time, President Lincoln and Edwin Stanton are in Washington, D.C., doing what every one of these people have to do sooner or later in your career, sign paperwork. Everybody's got to do it, right? Well, on June 15, 1864, the President will be signing a unique piece of paper for those of us that are Gettysburg folks. This is John Buford. We all know who he is. He commanded a division of cavalry out on the first day's battle. For those of you that were here last year, it is the only item in this presentation that I put in for 1863 that I'm also putting in for 1864. So because it's very, very unique and unusual. Buford is here at Gettysburg, does a banner job, gets sick, goes down to Washington, D.C., where he is ill in December of 1863. He dies of disease on December 16, 1863. While he's dying, his friend and former cavalry chief of the Army of the Potomac, George Stoneman, gets to the War Department and tells them we need to promote Buford to be a major general. Buford is a brigadier general. He is dying. We want to promote him on his deathbed to be a major general. Buford is told this fact. He says, "Is it true?" And then he says, "Now I wish I could have lived." You know what Buford's last words were? "Put guards on the road and don't let the men run to the rear." The last words of John Buford. It talks like John Buford, doesn't it? Well, he dies December 16, 1863. Guess when he gets his promotion to Major General? He gets it for gallantry and meritorious service at Gettysburg, but when is it actually signed? June 15, 1864. So this is an object in the National Civil War Museum. This is an original commission of John Buford. This is his deathbed promotion. This is the original one, signed on June 15, 1864. Those are the original signatures by Edwin Stanton and Abraham Lincoln. That's here. Same time they're signing this in Washington, this man, ladies and gentlemen, is going to operate against the city of Lynchburg. Remember what the instructions for Grant was, or what they were? Operate in the Shenandoah Valley, take out Lynchburg, which is a rail station, and a hospital site. In May of 1864, Franz Sigel tries that, and he is defeated at the Battle of Newmarket. So, Grant is looking for a different commander, and he selects this man here, David Hunter. Hunter gets down to Lynchburg there, and he will fight a battle there. About 16,000 men in the Union forces, about 14,000 in the Confederates. Unfortunately for him, fortunately for the Confederates, Robert E. Lee hears about this and sends Jubal Early to fend him off. This is a battle that doesn't produce a lot of casualties, but what it ends up doing is Hunter is not able to take Lynchburg. That railroad is able to continue to move through Charlottesville, continue to move through and get supplies, and Hunter is pushed all the way back into West Virginia. So it pretty much opens up the Shenandoah Valley, and it is not until Phil Sheridan is able to come in and subdue that, ladies and gentlemen, that this is going to be taken care of for the Union forces. These are the field goggles that David Hunter used at the Battle of Lynchburg on June 17th and 18th of 1864. These are the actual field goggles that he uses on the 17th and 18th. Further to the east, Further to the east, we're going to find this man fighting. You all know him, Joshua Chamberlain. And Chamberlain is wounded on June 18th at a battle called Reeves Salient. If you remember, the Union Army attacks a Confederate position there. Chamberlain is shot in the pelvic region. He's very, very badly wounded. He's taken to a hospital in Annapolis, Maryland, and he gets a promotion to general, as you can see here, brigadier general, because Grant thinks he's going to die. This is the official telegram sent to the telegraph office in Annapolis, Maryland, and it is Chamberlain's own personal copy. This is his copy of the telegram that was sent to him. The National Civil War Museum has all of Chamberlain's materials, all of them, 270 letters we have. We have almost the largest collection of Civil War letters. We have most all his wartime letters, and we've got a number of his other items, including some post-war items that relate to him. He survives that wound. I think everybody knows that. Doesn't die until 1914. This is a watch. I don't know a lot about it, but it is used at a battle at Decatur. This is at Peachtree Creek. We know the man who owned it, and that is a bullet mark where a bullet struck that watch and disassembled it. So that crease that you see in it, this soldier from Indiana, in the 80th Indiana, this is in the 23rd Army Corps, he had that watch in his pocket when the bullet struck it, fighting on July 20th, 1864. Also, this color, which was used in the Atlanta campaign, this is an actual state color of the 109th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment that fought on Culp's Hill. This color was given to them on April 5th, 1864 at Pittsburgh, and it was carried in the Atlanta campaign. And we know many things about it. Corporal John Vallew of Company C of the 109th Pennsylvania carried it. It was struck several times on May 15th, 1864 at the Battle of Resaca. At the Battle of Pine Knob, the top of the spear of it, the finial of the flag, was actually shot off. And this flag was later retired. This flag was owned in a private collection, and then it was acquired by the National Civil War Museum. So most of these PA flags are at the State Museum. This one happens to be one in the National Civil War Museum, and you can see that it has a battle honor of Gettysburg on it, which means it is an 1864 flag. Still, August 15, 1864, what is happening in Mobile Bay? Remember, Nathaniel Banks was supposed to take it, but he doesn't. This man is going to cut it off, ladies and gentlemen. Admiral Farragut. Farragut, a longtime naval officer, commissioned when, this man was in the Navy when he was 9 years old. He's fighting in the War of 1812 when he is basically 11 years old. He'll be in charge of the blockading squadron, and down at the bottom of this map is the entrance to Mobile Bay. That's where Fort Morgan and Fort Gaines are, and on August 5th, 1864, he will sail his ship, his flagship, the USS Hartford, with about 17 other vessels inside the mouth of Mobile Bay, and he will, for all practical purposes, seal it off. Mobile, which is up at the top part of the slide that you see, would be on the left-hand side of the slide as you're looking at it, I believe. That will not fall till the very end of the war. But as far as the Confederates getting material in and out of it, Admiral Farragut will seal it off. And remember the famous words that come out of the Battle of Mobile Bay. Remember when one of the skippers said, "What about the torpedoes?" And he said, "Damn the torpedoes, go ahead," or "Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead." That all took place at the Battle of Mobile Bay. In the collection of the National Civil War Museum are 4 objects from the Battle of Mobile Bay, and they belong to Farragut, to David G. Farragut. This is his estate plate that goes on his estate room, inscribed to him on the flagship, the Hartford. So this was at the Battle of Mobile Bay. 2 of his candlesticks and fringe from his epaulets. All of these belong to him, all of them there at the Battle of Mobile Bay for August of 1864. North Carolina, let's talk about another Navy. We've got a ram operating here called the Albemarle, CSS Albemarle. The man that sunk it, ladies and gentlemen, is William Barker Cushing, the brother of R. Alonzo Cushing, who fought and died, was killed here on July 3rd, 1863. The Albemarle, as a Confederate ram, wreaked havoc on the Roanoke River and the Albemarle Sound here through April of 1864 until October. And William Barker Cushing is the man that came up with a plan. How do we sink it? How do we sink it? And this is him. He was born, as you can see, in Wisconsin, went to the Naval Academy, but he did not graduate, and he was 32 years old when he died, and he is buried at Annapolis, Maryland, here. He actually draws a map. The Albemarle is on the Roanoke River, and you cannot use a naval vessel that has a very heavy draft. In other words, if it's too heavy, you can't sail up the river and sink this vessel. So this man comes up with a plan. Let's use some lighter vessels, and let's use a torpedo mounted on a pole. That's called a spar torpedo. This is it. This is an actual drawing from William Barker Cushing's report of the boat and the spar torpedo. So on the night of October 27th, 1864, in the middle of the night, after darkness, he's going to sail on one of these little boats, himself and about 13 or 14 other men. They're going to pass Confederate sentries. They're going to find the Albemarle, this ironclad ram, protected by some log booms. They're going to run their little skiff right over the log booms because, having been on the river for many, many months, the log booms are covered with slick moss. And so his little boat goes right over them. He puts this spar torpedo right up against the Albemarle, pulls the detonation cord, and the explosion is so great it blows him off the vessel. He said he was exhausted. He survived. He went back to the shore. He crawls back and gets back into Union lines, and the Albemarle is sunk in about 6 feet of water all the way down to the bottom. And this is it after it was raised. The Union forces raised it, brought it up, and inside it were these two items that are now in the collection of the National Civil War Museum. The actual spyglass of the captain of the Albemarle and one of the cutlasses. This is inscribed to William Barker Cushing. William Barker Cushing became a commander because of this incident. He was the youngest commander in the United States Navy at that time, promoted because of this. And these two items were given to him as a gift for sinking the Albemarle and the Union Army being able to get the upper hand again on the Roanoke River and the Albemarle Sound. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the election of 1864. Abraham Lincoln is elected back to the White House because Atlanta falls, among other things. But once he's elected, it's for his second term, it assures that the war is going to be prosecuted till its fullest extent, everybody. It assures the war is going to be prosecuted till its fullest extent. Lincoln won 400,000 more popular votes than George McClellan. He had 212 electoral votes to McClellan's 21. McClellan only won 3 states. And of course the military voted in favor of Lincoln. This is an actual elector's ticket. This is a ticket given to the 5 electors, because if you remember, the popular vote elects people for the Electoral College to go out and cast their vote. How many electors were in California in 1861? 5. This is an election ticket for the state of California. And you can see the 5 electors for Abraham Lincoln and where they come from on it. What's on the back of it? Boy, don't you love this. The Kershaws in the Alabama. This is the fight between these two ships off of Cherbourg, France, June 19, 1864, when the Confederate raider is sunk right there. And Lincoln is putting this right on the back of his election ticket to show progress being made in the American Civil War. Once again, when the year concludes, Sherman is in Atlanta, Petersburg is under siege, Shenandoah Valley has been disrupted, these ports are being cut off, and the noose is tightening around the Confederacy. And within 100 days, the Civil War is over. All because of this year, ladies and gentlemen, in the American Civil War. I hope you'll come up to the National Civil War Museum and see some of these objects. I want to thank everybody for having me here, and I'll try to take a few questions. Thanks. I've also been told, if you have a question, wait for Warren to run over with the microphone, okay?
How are you able to procure the Chamberlain documents and materials?
The Chamberlain collection was actually owned by a Civil War artist, and he sold it. And the museum acquired it from there. The letters were published in 2012. You can buy the book here in the Visitor Center. and it was called Joshua L. Chamberlain, Life and Letters. It was published by Osprey Press in England, and the editor of those 270 letters was Dr. Thomas Just Jordan, who wrote the book Stand Firm, You Boys of Maine. So he edited those for the National Civil War Museum, and they are very good. There's at least 50 wartime letters in there, and one of them, the Fredericksburg letter, which the National Civil War Museum has, is about 13 pages handwritten, all in Chamberlain's own hand. And it is written 4 days after the attack on the Sunken Road. It's written December 17, 1863. Yeah.
How many of the letters and diaries in your museum have been transcribed?
Just this part of them. Every day is a new adventure for us at the National Civil War Museum. We have 21,000 archival documents, 21,000. All right, so a diary might be 300 pages. Every day we have volunteers or interns that come in and do that work for us. And my hope is we will be able to get those transcribed parts of them on our website in a finding aid, and people will come to the museum and say, I'd like to look at this diary that relates to this. Most of what I showed you archivally, historians have not mined it. It has never been seen, it has never been used. And it's not because we don't want it used, it's because we want to try to get it out to where people know we have it. If you're the National Archives, how can you scan all your documents? You can't, at least not in my lifetime. You're going to be able to do it. So every day we try to make progress toward that work. And some of these things, I've worked there 2.5 years. I don't know all the things that we have there, which is part of the fun about it. It's the discovery. What I like to do is when the curator shows me an item, I like to go down to the National Archives, pull the pensions. I'll give you an example really quick. The curator showed me a photograph of a soldier, a musician, that somebody donated to us about a month or two ago. And he said, hey, this kid is 10 years old. I said, look, I've seen young kids in the Civil War. I don't think he's 10. I went down to the National Archives. This man had a pension, and you know he enlisted 17 days past his 10th birthday. He enlisted at Alcatraz Island to be in the Civil War, and he was 10 years old in the Civil War. And he died in 1922, and he's buried in Los Angeles National Cemetery. Now we have a whole story. Can we imagine us telling a 10-year-old kid that when a 10-year-old kid comes to the museum? That's the connections we want to make, because that's something somebody can relate to. Okay, one more, Warren says. I'm sorry, I never answered a question without talking too much. I apologize.
So what's the status? How fragile is the diary? I mean, having been to Andersonville, would he have had it with him?
You would be surprised. It's not very fragile at all. So what we normally try to do is scan or copy these items and then use the copies to work from and put the items in a box. So most of the items we have are really in pretty good shape. The paper, remember, most of the paper in the American Civil War is made of linen. It's not that you start making wood pulp paper till about the Civil War and then afterwards when newspapers go, of course, and go from wood from a tree. So this stuff is not acidic and it's very well preserved. I hope it'll be around for many, many years so we can look at it. I just want to thank Cindy. I want to thank the whole crew here at the Gettysburg Foundation. They're doing a great job here. I want to thank all of you for coming out to see me. You honor me by being here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.